fabric on the Baby Lock Vibrant is easy. It's commonly a technique that's used on sewing machines or domestic sewing machines. It was used a lot in heirloom sewing. The gist of it is that you're joining two pieces of fabric together with a stitch. And in this case, we're going to use the flat lock wide stitch. I have my needle in the left position. And this time what I've done is I want my ladders, or what the stitch that you're going to see when we open up our fabric, to be in a pretty decorative thread. So I've placed a decorative thread in my needle. Then I have in my upper looper, I have a standard overlock thread, and in my lower looper, I also have a standard overlock thread. I've adjusted my stitch length to 2.5. And now let's take a look at our tensions, because we've done a few things a little differently here. We actually don't have any tension on that needle thread, and the reason is that when we open the stitch, we want that needle thread to open up or expand. I've placed my upper looper tension on 2, and I've left that lower looper tension on 4. Now my cutting blade is in the down position because I do not want to cut the edges of my fabric, and I have that wide stitch finger in place because I want a wider stitch. Now I've prepped my fabric in this case by folding my fabric wrong sides together, so I have a fold on each end, and I'm placing those folds together. Then I'm going to place everything underneath my presser foot, and this is where I need to make sure that I align the folds of my fabric with my stitch fingers and my needle, so I'm just catching a little bit of fabric. I want to catch the edge. I don't want to catch probably more than a 1/16 of an inch. So at the toe of the presser foot, there are 2 little prongs or feet that stick out, and by using my fingers, I usually place the edge of my fabric right up next to that second one, which is on the right hand side. So I always suggest when you're working with a flat lock stitch and you're doing a technique like this, to cut extra fabric and play with your placement so that you are sure of where you're placing things. The other thing that you can do is you can place a piece of tape there, or you can use the stitch guide that came with your machine. So we're going to stitch to the end. Cut my threads, and we'll take a look at our stitch. When you look at this, you can see that that stitch really hangs out over that edge, and I want to, because I'm going to eat up all of that thread when I open my stitch up. And by opening my stitch up, I mean I'm going to pull from the inside, and see how I open that stitch up, and see how beautifully that spans across, and you can see my folded edges. So if I grab too much fabric like I did here, you can see that that buckles underneath. So it's something that you always want to watch as you're stitching. Is your optimum is to have these 2 edges butting up and have this really nice wide stitch. If your stitch is narrow, that means that you've grabbed a little bit too much of that fabric. We'll just keep kind of pulling that out and poking that out, and that I think is a great edge, other than right here I caught just a little bit too much of that fabric. So another great thing that you can do with this bridging technique is to play with ribbon. In this case, I have 2 pieces of velvet ribbon, and I think by placing a decorative thread in that needle position and using that flat lock stitch, I have a really pretty accent piece for any project. So let's go over how I did that. Again, I cut 2 pieces of velvet ribbon, and this ribbon is probably about 2 inches. I still have all the same settings, and in this case, I'm going to place everything underneath the presser foot, and again, these are now right sides together, and I'm going to line my fabric edge with that second toe. I want to catch into the ribbon, but I want stitches hanging off the edge, and I would say if you're in about 1/8 of an inch, you'll be that would be pretty close. What I find is the more fabric that I grab, the less ability I have to open up my stitches flat. So it's kind of a learning curve as you're learning to do this type of technique, or any type of technique using that flat lock stitch, is you want to grab just the right amount of fabric. And I do pay very close attention to where everything sits on my presser foot as I am stitching. So you can see that when we look at this, the stitch is not attractive at all. It's really kind of very unattractive. But when I open this up, what will happen is, can you see how pretty that is? As I pull this out, how pretty those stitches are down the center of that ribbon. And you can tell when you've grabbed a little bit too much, because you'll feel a ridge on the backside. And when you've got the perfect amount, those two edges of that ribbon will sit right on top of one another. But what a great accent for whether it's a purse that you're creating or it's on a garment. This I just think is so pretty. It's a great way to take two pieces of ribbon that you might have had in your stash for years, put them together in a new technique, and all that you really needed was flat lock stitch, decorative thread in the needle, and the Baby Lock Vibrant.